Young lad, righteous. War can't buy great. Then craftsman so full of technique. Make him feel like someone good and then alright. Show up at them night, cause we hard clean. Enough of them say them a do it, but them not do it like we. On them no for what them hear about. Warrior they are to what them hear about. Open up it, they can make it hear out. Anybody not the way them a feel clear out.
Hey everyone, today I present What If Trunks Was Sent to the World of the Legend of Korra, Part 1. Please enjoy. Unit 216. Cancel that 420 all along the watchtower. Come back to the station. Over. The police scanner blurted at full volume in Assamese. Bolin proclaimed, Avatar Mobile. Turning the knob down, Korra spoke the anger that's been hung up on both their minds. I'm sick of this. These scanners are useless. We've been patrolling all night. Well, unfortunately it's the only way we can find criminals before he does. Oh, don't remind me, Mako. The devil of Republic City. How pretentious. She burst out, kicking the dashboard. She turned back to him. How did you manage to convince Asami to let you use her car anyway? What do you mean by you? It just so happens that I'm actually a good driver, unlike a certain someone who first thought the clutch was the glove compartment. He brought his gloved hand to his mouth and coughed, followed shortly by her name. Hey. The cough is supposed to cover the name. Nah, I'm starting a thing where it's separate. At that, Korra raised her fist and made him cringe as he awaited the customary pain that followed. Calling all units. Level 4 alert. Jailbreak at headquarters. Officers down. Electrocuted. Convicts are still at large. They are armed and dangerous. Last seen heading east. I repeat. Level 4 alert. Equalist jailbreak. The hot-tempered avatar eased off her attack. That's not far from here. She sat up straight in her seat, taking her feet off the dash. A quick glance at him was enough to form her reaction. Well? Don't just sit there. Step on it, Mako. Pulling away from the side of the road, they set off as fast as the Avatar Mobile could accelerate, leaving a set of asphalt vandalizing tire tracks behind him. Her voice was loud, compensating for the roar of the engine. You think we can get to them in time? I think so. They're probably just around the corner. They better be. There's no way he'll beat us to it this time. Searching frantically, they raced through the empty streets of Republic City. Korra's eyes sprinted from left to right, looking down the streets they passed for the escaped convicts. Stop. At that, Mako stomped those brakes as hard as possible, turning the wheel in all directions, trying not to spin out until the vehicle came to a complete halt. Hey, be careful. She regained her composure. Do you know what Asami would do to you if you scratched her car? You said stop. He didn't waste any time changing into reverse and backing up. He turned the car around, pulling a J-turn with precision. The vehicle slowed down and turned down the first street to the left. She turned to him and slammed the dashboard yet again. Not the street, Mako. His eyes darted to the avatar. Are you kidding me? You seriously couldn't say this before I turned? They're getting away, Mako. He couldn't stop himself from letting loose a deep grunt. Turning around as fast as he could, they returned to the main street. Is it this one? Making sure to ask before turning this time. They both heard the very loud crash emanating from their destination. Yeah, that's the one. Turn, Mako. He pulled the handbrake and turned, sending the Avatar Mobile drifting round the corner. Don't tell me how to drive. Their eyes fell on the wreckage before them, seeing their fears turn to reality. They were too late. Shit! She exclaimed. The car slowly came to halt. They got out and carefully moved to the wreckage, making sure to defend themselves in case the convicts are still up and going, or, more likely, the devil is still around to clean up. She moved around the smashed vehicle. Do you think he's still here? Mako walked along the other side of the wreckage. Don't know. Let's ask them. This sight was all too familiar. 4 convicts and another, no doubt the getaway driver, lay sprawled all over the road, sidewalk and even on the busted hood of the van. Korra's frustration got the better of her once again. How the hell does he do this every time? This is the third time this week. Accommodating her anger was a hard kick against the debris. Mako bent down and examined the wreckage, followed by the surrounding area. I don't understand how this possible. Look at this. No other tracks, no burn marks, no water, no out-of-place boulders and no property damage. This car is totaled but there's nothing in the road to crash into and all other objects are untouched. Gee, nice work, detective. Pointing out the obvious is always so helpful. She strode over to the unconscious convicts. Their wounds were something fierce, definitely not inflicted by an everyday Lee. In the distance she heard a faint grunt. It belonged to another convict, unseen till now, crawling deeper into the shadows. She sprinted over to him, eager to get some info. Mako, get over here quick. One's still awake. The crawling man heard their footsteps behind him. Was he here to beat him further? He wasn't keen on finding out. He clutched onto the ground, trying to grip whatever he could to get away as fast as possible. The footsteps neared him. He dragged his beaten body as fast as he could. No. No. Please. Let me live. He felt a strong grip grab onto him. No. The person above him forcefully turned him onto his back. To his surprise, he didn't see the face of the devil, but the face of the avatar. Honestly, who knew which was worse? She looked at the broken man before her. She was horrified to see the bruises, blood and misplaced bones on this man's body. Her eyes met his, the fear and terror on display made her stomach drop. This man had been beaten and left to crawl along the broken bodies of his fallen comrades. This was torture. Who could do something like this? Korra cringed at the sight. The fear this man experienced was all too familiar to her. She had experienced it before, at the hands of a nightmare himself, Amon. She couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. She pushed her feelings of sympathy aside and reminded herself what she was doing here. Tell me what happened here. A pained grin came to his face. Haven't you already? He struggled to speak as coughs took hold of his voice. Already done enough to us equalists. Since killing Amon? She was taken aback by the accusation. Are the remaining equalists seriously blaming her for it? Of course she had nothing to do with Amon's death. Is that what you all think, huh? Nonetheless, she decided to play along, knowing full well that it will only play in her favor if the man truly feared her. Well then I guess you only have 30 seconds to live. Her grip around his collar tightened and she hoisted him off the ground. Better fill it with words, pal. Who did this? He stared her down, followed by an attempt to spit in her face. This boiled her blood. Any sympathy she previously had dissipated instantly as small drops of spit and blood trickled down her cheek. Oh you motherfucker. Now you've pissed me off. She dragged him over to the side of a building and slammed him against the wall. Out of his throat came a constipated yell. She held up her fist, igniting it, creating a covering of bright, hot flames. Tell me what I need to know. Pain and fear rolled his vocal cords as he spoke. He fought like a demon. Didn't ask a question. Didn't say a word. She groaned at his answer and slammed him again. I'm not in the mood for the pronoun game. Who is he? I don't know who he was, I swear. She threw him to the floor. What does he look like? He painfully lifted his arm in protest as she neared him. Stop it please. His hair looked kinda purple. Very distinct. But that's all I know, I swear. Mako gripped her wrist. Okay Korra, I think he's endured enough torture for one night. We have what we need. Let's leave before Lin shows up. She stared at the equalist. Fine. They walked back to the car. She quickly turned back. I'm going to the police station tomorrow. If I don't see you there because you ran away before the police showed up, I'll find you and have you eating through a straw for the next 2 months. Got it? His response was quick, his voice well shaken. I got it. Trunks opened the faulty door to his old apartment. As per usual, it never opened big enough to comfortably walk into the small living space, so once more he had to resort to sliding through the gap. He looked around the old apartment. No furniture, just a fridge he made from the scraps the junkyard had to offer. Although his home was a dump, He has lived in worse conditions. His eyes fell back onto the tears in his clothes. It was just due to a loss of focus, nothing more. Mental discipline could fix the focus issue but not the tear. He'll have to get some supplies and sew it back up. He couldn't help but wonder. What would his father say? His own flesh and blood, living in an old, run-down apartment, having to sew his own clothes back up. What a disgrace. Although his father was a difficult man, he truly missed him. The grueling training, the short temper, the arrogance, oh King Kai, his arrogance. These were traits he often saw within himself. Although he tried to be polite and respectful, he knew his father's qualities were a mirror of his own. He's spent a few weeks in Republic City. For the first few days, he searched for the one responsible for bringing him here, but to no avail. If he couldn't be found, there was no way back. Trunks was stuck in a world he knew none of. He brushed his hand through his hair. The exhaustion of work took its toll on him and he needed rest. Sleep, that's something he hadn't seen much of lately. Devil of Republic City hospitalizes convicts. Korra slammed the morning newspaper on the crumb-covered surface of the table, shaking all the empty bowls to the point of almost tumbling over. I can't believe this. Korra. Not at the table. Tenzin ordered, followed with a prolonged scowl. He regained his composure, noting Korra's obvious frustration. So I take that you have a problem with this vigilante as well. She threw the newspaper over the table, barely within reach of Asami, who was sitting across from her. Korra gave a groan. You have no idea. He left a bunch of equalists in the middle of the street, beaten to near death. How does someone justify something like that? She said, banging her head on the wooden surface. He will be dealt with soon enough. The council are going to have a meeting tomorrow about the acts of the vigilante. Oh, fantastic. Let's hear the wise wisdom of the council. Korra said, rolling her eyes. Tenzin no doubt picked up on her obvious disliking to the members the council hosted, with exception of himself, that is. Although, sometimes he was unsure of that as well. Thus far, the council seems unanimous in its decision to issue a warrant for the vigilante's arrest. Yeah, right, like the police can do anything. She scoffed. Tenzin, this guy is like a ghost. I don't know how he does it, but he beats us to it every single time. Last night, Mako and I were chasing those equalist guys. We barely lost sight of them for 1 minute, and suddenly he just swoops in and takes them out before we arrive. Korra groaned once more, leaning back and fiddling with her chopsticks. It's not completely unjustified, Asami said out of the blue, still deep in thought while studying the printed piece. Korra raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Her eyes peeked over the top of the paper, quickly being met by Korra's puzzled expression. Oh, your remark you said about how he can be so violent. Korra jolted up at those words, eyeing her as she further inspected the article. What? You think he has the right to do that? Her striking tone made Asami shift back a little before speaking. Although she and Korra have become fairly good friends by now, she is still somehow surprised at how confrontational Korra can be sometimes. She cleared her throat. No, but I do think he has a good motive. According to the paper, 3 officers were hospitalized in their escape. One of them is in critical condition. Korra reached across the table, almost climbing over it. She took the paper and scanned through where Asami was reading. Tenzin looked over at the 2 girls. Our vigilante could possibly be a metal bender. It explains why there are no other signs of bending being used at any of the scenes. Asami glanced back at the picture of the wrecked vehicle in deep thought. I'm not so sure about that. The side and front bumpers of the getaway vehicle they used are made from a hardened plastic. Cabbage Corp claims they use it to lighten their cars, but it's just to save money. If it were a metal bender, the front bumper could only be pulled by the folding vehicle, which isn't the case. That bumper made contact with something. Asami looked over at Tenzin. That sure makes this thing a lot more mysterious, doesn't it? Indeed it does. People can have their opinion on whether or not those men deserved what happened, but it's not right for a vigilante to dole out punishment as he sees fit. Not even the Avatar could be passed of consequences for doing what the vigilante has done. Korra moved even closer to her, But her motive appeared quite hostile. Exactly. He has no right. Asami grew uncomfortable at her closeness but defended her notion from before. Korra, you did the exact same thing when you first came to the city. Remember the triads? And from what I heard from Mako earlier, you weren't as gentle with the men from last night either. I barely touched him. I just ruffled his hair to get him to talk, that's all. Korra turned away from Asami to her teacher. All I got out of him was a small description. He said that he has purple hair. Tenzin shifted at those words. It just occurred to me that our vigilante might be an angry spirit. He reached over and took the newspaper from Korra. Just like your descriptions of the previous encounters, there were no signs that any bending took place. A spirit could have caused that wreckage. Korra shrugged off Tenzin's idea. I don't know. All the stories of angry spirits I've heard of are spirits terrorizing innocent people, not targeting criminals. That might be true, but we can't overlook it just because it hasn't happened yet. It could explain why they say he has purple hair. One could easily mistake the features of a spirit for just about anything. Asami looked at him. Well, if this is a person, his power isn't something we've seen before. I mean, just look at what he's done so far. What if he isn't even trying? Korra looked over at Asami, looking slightly more concerned than she'd care to admit. What do you mean? I'd know. What if all this is just him getting started? Like maybe he's working towards something bigger. Like maybe he's a lot more powerful than we already think, but he just hasn't had a chance to show it off yet. Those words rang in Korra's ears. Her demeanor silently changed, as she was suddenly shelling up a bit at the thought. What if Asami's right? Asami continued, speaking about any possibilities of what they might be facing. As Korra stared into the emptiness of her bowl, Asami's words slowly faded into the background. Although it was difficult for her to admit, there have been times where she has doubted her own ability after witnessing the destruction left in his wake. He has the entire city up in arms, looking towards her to face this unknown threat. If it comes down to it, she has to be the one to step up. She could feel her breaths become slightly more shallow by the second. The mere thought made her tense up. Right, Korra? Her thoughts were interrupted. She quickly tried to regather herself, focusing her attention back on Asami. Yeah, I guess. She swallowed the lump in her thought. Sorry, what? You didn't hear any of that? Asami chuckled. Nah, I was just saying that it seems like this guy has the right idea at least. If he's only going after criminals, maybe it's possible to show him a better way to do what he already does. Korra frowned. What, you mean like get him to join our team? Well, maybe. I'd much rather have him on our side than have to fight against him. Because I'm not gonna lie, having seen what he can do, it's scary. Tenzin put down the paper and intertwined his fingers. A frown formed on his brow as he stared into the open space in deep thought. Perhaps Asami is right. But for the time being, who or whatever the devil of Republic City is, he is clearly a very dangerous individual. Whichever solution presents itself, it is imperative that we put a stop to this before more people get hurt. The only question now is, who is he and how do we find him? How much would that be? Trunks asked the much older woman. 29 yuans. He reached down into his pocket and searched for the little remaining money he had. He pulled out what he could manage and started counting. Would you sell it to me for 16 yuans and a small geminite crystal? Give it time and it will really grow on you, he said, holding it out with a nervous smile. Sorry, kid. Go find sewing supplies somewhere else. Trunks dropped his head in disappointment and stuffed what little he had back into his pocket. He continued his trek through the crowded market as he did before, hoping to find something to fix his torn clothes. His almost clothes. His part-time job as a miner didn't pay well. They are far more interested in paying their precious earthbenders than paying him regardless of how hard he worked. Seems Amon's revolution didn't help much in bringing equality to benders and non-benders. The only difference he made was getting Republic City to having democratic elections, but those elections won't take full effect till the end of next month. Till then, the council still maintained their hold over the city. The rest of Amon's revolution was pointless. Here he was, scrambling to pay his bills and hardly having enough left to eat, let alone fix his only clothes. But Trunks was all too familiar with this struggle for survival. It was far too familiar in his world. The world he left behind. No, he couldn't afford to put more weight on his conscience. He had no choice. He had no one left, nothing but a dead wasteland. He shook his head, pushed his thoughts aside and kept on walking. He weaved through the hordes of people at the market. The sun had been beating down on him for quite a while now. He could feel the sweat gather along his hairline. A few minutes of flying would solve his problem. But not here. He wasn't in the mood for attracting that much attention. So for the time being he just kept on walking like any other citizen. He continued his thoughts on his current situation till he felt a slight force against his chest and shoulder. He regained his focus to see a young woman falling to the floor to his right. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, rubbing her head. He quickly stooped down to help her up. "No, it's my fault. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going." "Neither was I." She started picking up the food which had fallen out of her basket. "Let me help you," he offered. Not waiting for a reply, he started putting the food back. He looked up at her as she collected all the food which lay all over the floor. She was quite a beautiful young woman. Dark brown hair slightly covered her stunning green eyes. A few freckles on her nose completed with a green sundress. She looked about the same age as he, maybe a year or two in difference. A blush rose to her cheeks as her eyes met his. Realizing he had been staring, his eyes dropped back down to the task at hand. He picked up the last fruit on the floor. It was a fresh green apple. He held it in his hand for some time. He hadn't eaten in a while. It wouldn't be that bad if he just took it. Wait. No. Stealing wasn't really his thing. Although, it was just an apple. He could just put it into his pocket. A very audible growl emanating from his stomach snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked back up at her and realized she was staring at him. He quickly bent forward to place the apple back into the basket. At this she slightly giggled and motioned her hand to him. "Keep it. Everyone needs something to eat, right?" His uncertainty was very clear to her. "You sure?" "Yeah, go ahead. It's just an apple." He stood back up and offered her a hand. She took it and he hauled her to her feet. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome. So I guess I'll see you around sometime." He stuttered a little and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah. Definitely." She smiled at him and resumed walking as she had before. He too kept moving, only turning back once to see if she was still in sight. She wasn't. The heat really got to him. He opted to take a break and enjoy his apple under a nearby tree in the park. He plunged down onto the soft grass. His racing thoughts subsided. He lay there staring at the leaves as they moved in the wind while he ate. He couldn't help but sense the surroundings. When he concentrated, he could tell the exact position of everyone in the city. Each energy was unique, just as the person they derived from. Some energies were stronger than other. Higher energy levels always belonged to benders, with the avatar being no exception. She had the strongest signal of them all. He didn't know much about her. All he knew was that she had a temper that could rival that of his father, but lacked the same discipline. He noticed that in the distance some energy levels were rising rapidly. At this he jolted up and sighed. Never a dull moment. "Please. I beg of you. I'll pay more than what I owe next week," the shopkeeper pleaded with the men smashing his second-hand radio transmitters. One of the gang members looked at him, smiling as his partner sent another fire blast into the shop. "I'm sorry, pal. I truly am, but you know the rules. If we don't get our money by the end of the month, we blow off some steam. You, my friend, are 3 days late." "Please stop." The shopkeeper pleaded all he could, but the two men before him didn't bat an eye. "Do you want to know what really irritates me, Mr. Saitama? A man who yells at me. And when I get irritated, I get angry. And when I get honor." A solid grip formed around the gang member's right arm before he could finish. "People get hurt." Before the goon could even react, Trunks bent his in a very unnatural way till a very loud pop could be heard. "Ugh! Slim. His partner yelled, jumping to his aid, hurling a haymaker right at Trunks' head. This was of course dodged with much ease, as were the next punches in line with the man's combo. Bastard! He yelled, loading up at the hardest right hook that he possibly could. But Trunks didn't dodge this one. No. He didn't need to. He closed his eyes and simply listened to the cracking of the man's bones against the side of his face. This was followed by the expected yell of pain that always accompanied such foolish actions. The man fell to the floor, holding his hand against his chest, completely overcome with pain. Trunks still held the other goon in a tight grip and tossed him in front of an oncoming Satomobile. The driver, oblivious to what was going on, slammed the brakes as soon as the human ragdoll smashed through his windshield, his vehicle screeching along the asphalt. Trunks turned back to the man holding his hand in agony. He bent down to his level. So, which gang are you from? The man looked up in horror to the one stooping before him. I don't know what you're talking about. Trunks sighed, becoming visibly agitated. Are you serious? You are on your knees with a broken hand that you got from punching me in the face, and you still keeping quiet. I'm not saying shit. Trunks crouched to the man's level. He gave a long stare, waiting as the man sat there in agony. Still nothing, huh? Trunks sighed. Fine. The man yelped as Trunks grabbed him by his already broken hand and dragged him across the pavement to where his partner's unconsciousness body lay. You know, I was actually in a pretty good mood today. This would have been a lot easier if you'd just tell me. Stop. Stop. Please, you don't know what they'll do to you. Shh. You had your chance. Now it's my turn again. Trunks said as he reached into his partner's pocket, revealing a small Earth Kingdom knife. He flipped it open and placed it to the goon's abdomen, applying just enough pressure to slightly pierce the skin. The man defiantly looked Trunks dead in the eyes, still refusing to give in. Death was a mere few inches away. Okay, please stop. I'll tell you what you want to know. Just take the knife away. The man then proceeded to tell Trunks everything about who he worked for and where their headquarters were situated. He released the whimpering man and patted him on the head. See? That wasn't so hard. He climbed off the man to go talk to the shopkeeper. The man took a deep sigh of relief and held his hand once more, still reeling. Trunks quickly looked up as the sirens of the Republic City Police airship were triggered. The metal-bending officers quickly followed, jumping out of the airship and breaking their landings with their metal bending. Republic City Police. You are under our. What? The commanding officer's eyes widened in shock. The purple-haired vigilante was not there anymore. Damn it. He's gone. His other officers were right behind him. He can't be far. Set up an all-points bulletin. Suspect is a light purple-haired male in his early to mid-20s. Not armed but very dangerous. Anything else, sir? Yes. Tell Chief Beifong we've found him. The devil of Republic City. Darkness was on his tail as he strolled through the streets of the city, searching for a very specific address. He was close. The area was pretty beaten down. Gang violence coupled with soaring crime rates made for a terrifying nighttime walk for any normal person. But then again, Trunks wasn't like any other person. 47, 49. Here we are. His gaze fell upon the gang members posted outside the fortress. 4 of them. Their eyes were fixated on him as he strolled up to the front porch. Trunks kept his hands hidden deep within his pockets as he casually headed for the front door. They were having none of it. One moved to the left to block his way. He was easily a full head taller than Trunks, and probably weighed twice as much too. This is a private area, bub. Get lost. Trunks tilted his head up to look the man in the eyes. Move. I'm not asking twice. They all burst into simultaneous laughter. Bitch, are you high? Their laughter only increased. I want some of whatever he's on. Another chimed in. Trunks looked at them quite amused. Pretty soon he was chuckling along with them. Their smiles quickly faded till it was just him laughing on his own. Okay, that's enough of this shit. The man said, grabbing Trunks by the collar of his shirt, lifting him up a few inches. Get the fuck out of here, or this won't end pretty. Trunks's chuckle faded, but not his grin. He sighed. So I guess you guys haven't heard of me yet? He grabbed hold of the wooden railing to his left, breaking off a large chunk and sticking it straight through the man's arm. The man let out a blood-curdling scream, but Trunks quickly knocked him unconscious with a straight right. The other men looked at him bug-eyed, paralyzed with fear. I gotta admit, I'm a bit disappointed. Thought I was building up a reputation. But it's not that surprising really. He jumped forward faster than their eyes could follow, his face now mere inches away from his next victim. The witnesses I leave usually aren't able to talk anymore. Tenzin climbed over the yellow tape surrounding the crime scene. The entire property was swarmed by police officers and medics. Groaning and unconscious men were being rushed past him on stretchers. How many this time, Lin? She turned to see Tenzin pushing through the small crowd. Tenzin, we're busy here. Go back home and wait for the official report, she said, turning back to her officers. Lin, I'm just doing my duties as a council member to make sure I know the ongoings of Republic City. She stared at him for quite some time. She knew he wasn't the type to give in easily. It was best to just get it over with. Her frown gave way, albeit only slightly, as she shrugged. Fine. 26. Most were left unconscious and a few tried to run when we got here. Tenzin grimaced upon seeing the blood-soaked railing that led to the porch. When he noticed the rest of the blood across the wooden floor, he could feel his stomach churn. He had to step away just to keep from throwing up. Tenzin was never one to enjoy violence. Lin continued. He's targeting bigger groups now. These men are some of the most notorious criminals in the city. All of them are involved in a crime syndicate very similar to the Triads. They call themselves the Red House Organization. They are believed to have made a vast fortune in extortion and smuggling. We have yet to investigate. The house was in bad shape. Lots of walls were burnt and demolished. Blood pooled over the floors. It was clear who they'd been visited by. I take from this scenery that he's hitting harder as well, Tenzin said. Most of their injuries look about the same as the ones found before, but some unlucky few are bleeding much more. One of them is suffering from a broken back. Healers say paralysis is very likely. Examining the violence that took place a mere 20 minutes ago made Tenzin very unsure about his stance on Isami's idea. He knew full well that a partnership might not be possible at this point. We've found a very likely suspect that matches the description of the vigilante. Today he assaulted 2 gang members that belong to the same organization. We believe that they gave him this location. My officers got a good look at him from their airship, but when they swung down to the ground, he just vanished. No one knows where or how. She walked over to one of the vehicles, pulling out a police report. His name is Trunks Briefs. He is estimated to be in his early to mid-20s. Lives at 73rd Street, apartment C12. What about the purple hair that I told you about? Well, witnesses say his hair was more light purple-pink color. Close enough. Also, the injuries on the men he attacked were only slightly less severe than the ones inflicted tonight. So if this is indeed him, what is our next move? He asked. We went over to his apartment earlier today, but no one was there. After the events of the past few weeks, it's clear just how dangerous he is. I've already set up a squad to find him and take him down. This squad is an assembly of our most elite fire and metal benders. Yet I fear that it may not be enough. All of this. No one's ever seen anything like it. It won't be a problem. We can handle it. She sighed. But there's one more thing. My men want the avatar. Absolutely not. I don't want Korra mixing in with this man. Oh, believe me, I dislike the idea just as much as you do, but it promises the best results. Tenzin turned away, his brow furrowed. The worry in his eyes was clear. I don't know, Lin. She rested a hand on his shoulder. Take some time to think about it. We're going to take tomorrow to put him under surveillance and to form a solid strategy. The day after that, we're bringing this vigilante to justice. The cold air surged past his face, seeping into his bones as he flew over the city. Even through his tiredness, he had to admit, the city was a beautiful sight from above, the bright lights of the streets mixing with the dark shadows of the alleys. It was a sight that Trunks would never see back home again. He flew all the way over to the south side of the city, nearing the harbor. His eyes battled to stay open. How late was it? He wished he had a watch to keep track, but a guess was the best he could do. Maybe between 2 and 3 in the morning. Who knew? Even though his body begged for rest, he couldn't allow himself to sleep. Not yet. If the burst of energy that he felt in the city several minutes ago had been real, he knew that he'd have to act quickly. Unfortunately for him, as soon as the mysterious energy had appeared, it vanished. All he could do was to search the city, making sure everything was okay. He did this almost every evening. A full night's sleep had been something of the past for quite some time now. He had a job to do, a job that was much bigger than just his own needs. He spotted a small light by the horizon. It was easy to dismiss it as a regular boat light, but something about it just didn't look right. An aura formed around him, followed by a shockwave, as he rushed over. The water beneath him parted under his immense speed, and in no time at all he was able to reach the boat. His instincts were right. Instead of finding a boat light, he found a roaring fire. The boat wasn't overly large, but it was still far bigger than a regular fishing boat. Wasting no time, he rushed on deck. He covered his mouth, trying not to inhale all the smoke. The flames blazed all around him as he made his way to the bridge of the ships. It was hot, even for his standards. Looking around for any signs of life, he saw something strange. Much of the metal on the ship had been bent out of shape and ripped apart. It didn't seem like ordinary metal bending. The walls were covered in dark red stains, undoubtedly belonging to one of the victims. He followed the trail. Then he saw it. A body. It was that of a middle-aged man. Trunks ran over to see if he was still alive. His body looked shriveled and broken, full of blood. He was dead. Trunks was too late. Trunks closed his eyes and sat back, mentally cursing himself for not finding him sooner. Maybe the man would still be alive if he had reached him sooner. He opened his eyes and saw the man's lifeless body gripping something in his left hand. Trunks reached over and opened the hand, taking a look of what was inside. It was a photo little girl sitting on the man's shoulders. Cotton candy in one hand and a big smile on her face. Trunks's heart dropped at realizing that the girl was most likely this man's daughter. If only he'd been there sooner, then maybe that little girl wouldn't have to grow up without a dad. Korra stood near the sliding doors of the airship, waiting for their orders to jump. The tension in the room was overwhelming. She looked around at all the officers. Some were just as nervous as she was. Others probably had their nerves replaced by the same steel as the cables they bent. There was no time for anxiety. She was the Avatar. She was supposed to be the rock of this mission. After all, that's why Lin had asked her to join. Lin stood in the command center of the ship, communicating with her ground units as they scouted the area around Trunks' apartment. Do we have confirmation of his position? He just walked into his apartment. It appears he has a faulty door, so we'll opt to break it down. Make sure your unit has all exits covered. Copy. The group of 15 officers moved out of cover and dispersed around the building. An extra 5 cautiously approached the front door. We're in position. Waiting on your command. Move in on my call. She took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1. The leading officer blasted the door off its hinges, falling flat several feet away. They all moved in as fast as possible. Republic City Police. The first room was empty. The officer motioned with his hand for 2 others to sweep the bathroom. Clear. He and the remaining 2 officers stopped round the corner of the bedroom. It was the only place he could still be. He felt his heart thumping in his chest. He took a deep breath before giving the signal for him and the other officer to sweep the room. But when they charged in, their eyes widened. How could it be? It's empty. Lin was taken aback as well. What do you mean it's empty? He isn't in the apartment, Chief. That's impossible. Search for any trapdoors hidden in the apartment. There aren't any, Chief. Except for a bed and some kind of machine in the kitchen, this apartment is completely empty. She slammed her fist against the side of the ship. Son of a bitch. Korra came rushing into the command center, clearly having heard the commotion. What's going on? Get back to your assigned position, Avatar. I'm not one of your officers. Now tell me what's going on. Lin got very frustrated at Korra's stubbornness, but knew better than to expect the Avatar to follow orders. He isn't there. Well then let's find him. He couldn't have gone far. Trunks was already several blocks away, running faster than most people could see. He stopped in a dark alleyway and leaned back against the wall. That was close. He didn't even notice them sneaking up on him. What was going on with him lately? He felt distracted, never being able to fully concentrate on anything. He was tired. Always tired. The police haven't been making it any easier. They've been on his tail for the past few weeks now, relentless in their mission to catch him. But it got him thinking. Why was he running? He knew full well that they couldn't physically arrest him. He's far too powerful. What if he just went up there and talked to them? Maybe he'll be able to stop running. Maybe he could put an end to it. The guards swept the area, looking in every crack and crevice. After a few minutes the commander called it in. Chief, he's gone. I don't think we'll find him. She balled her fists and cursed under her breath. She reached to the intercom to call it off, but was interrupted by a screeching communicator. Chief. This is Unit 3. I can see him. He's on the rooftop of the building across the street. She hurried over to the captain steering the airship. Turn this ship around. Yes, Chief. He pushed some levers to his right and pulled the wheel to the left till the opposite building was in view. Korra hauled herself closer to the window for a better view. Lo and behold, there he was. There. He's just standing there. Staring at us. She said. Let's go. We need to drop now, before we lose him. Korra and Lin ran over to the drop site at the bottom of the airship to where Tenzin and the other 7 metal-bending officers were waiting. The metal doors slid open, making way for the officers to rappel. They waited till the airship moved over the building before jumping. To Trunks, it was quite an impressive spectacle. The metal benders were all connected to the ship as they jumped. Korra and Tenzin didn't have the same safety. They simply jumped and used their airbending to cushion their impact on the rooftop of the building he stood on. The metal benders grounded themselves a few seconds behind the airbenders. Lin pulled out her intercom. If he makes a single move, immobilize him immediately. Do whatever it takes. She walked forward. Trunks briefs. Republic City Police. You are under arrest. He stood on the very edge of the rooftop, his back facing the drop-off. I've come to talk to you. This is not a negotiation. If you don't surrender we will take you in by force. And if necessary, deadly force. Are you the chief? Lin shook her head, confirming his question. Trunks looked at the metal benders standing behind her, then at Councilman Tenzin. Finally his eyes rested on the Avatar. She was a little taller than he thought. In the newspapers she always looked short compared to the other people in her gang. You must be Avatar Korra. Korra twitched a little when she heard him say her name. What's up to you? The rumors were true. She does have quite the temper. He looked back at Lin. Chief, I'll agree to come with you to talk. But I want your word that none of these officers will attack me. And if I don't? Then I'll fight back. She looked over at her officers. They all had questioning looks on their faces. She turned back to him. Fine. You have my word. My officers won't attack you. Trunks relaxed a little. Good. I'm just going to jump down to the ground. We can go from down there. She nodded. The officers on the ground, unaware of their agreement, waited for Trunks to make any form of a sudden movement. When Trunks took a step back and jumped backwards into the air, the officers took it as an attempted escape. And just as their chief had ordered them to, they attacked with deadly force. Trunks sensed the spikes in their energy levels, but before he could react his body was already engulfed in a mixture of flames and lightning. Shit! Lin yelled as she grabbed her intercom. Stand down. All officers stand down. It was too late. The first move had already been made. They ran to the edge, afraid of what they'd see. But the view that greeted them terrified them even more. He stood on the pavement, staring up at them. He looked pissed. I guess diplomacy is out the window. I'm going down there, Korra said as she jumped over the edge. She landed on pavement, rolling to disperse her weight and immediately attacking without a single word. She threw out a large number of airbending strikes. He felt the heavy air pass around him, moving everything not tied to the ground, with exception to himself, that is. She ran to him and attacked with hellfire. Each blow was precise and powerful, yet he dodged these strikes with much more ease than Amon ever could. She was mere feet from him. A very powerful trail of flames came blasting through her fist, directed at him. He reached out and pushed his hand right through the middle of the heat and enclosed it around her fist, effectively terminating the fire. What? He spun her round and threw her against the wall of the building. This was the signal for the other 28 different benders to step in. The first attacks were long range. Most were fire-based. He moved around most blasts, sometimes even troughed them. He neared the officers. The fire had no effect on him. He jumped behind one of the officers. Sorry about this. He grabbed the man by his collar and dragged him towards another. The man didn't bend at him, knowing very well that he'd burn his fellow officer. Trunks pulled the man forward and flung him to the officer. The collision was hard enough to knock both unconscious. The onslaught of flames continued as he neared the others. His goal certainly wasn't to hurt the officers too much, but it was to display that they were no match. No bender could ever hope to hold their ground against a half-scion. The foes he had faced before made the benders of this world look like ants, easily squashed beneath the boot of the more powerful. He rushed to every firebending officer who dared attack, and knocked them out like it was nothing, all while dodging the metal cables trying to grasp him. His focus now was taking out the metal benders. He looked over to Lin and her unit trying to surround him. The barrage of cables came down upon him from all directions. He moved at an extremely fast pace to avoid them. This movement pushed him all the way back to the bridge over one of the rivers. Now Korra! Lin yelled. Suddenly, a vast amount of water rose from the river to consume him. Just as he was about to jump out, the water froze all around him. Got him! Korra yelled in triumph. She and the other officers ran to the bridge. I'm going to turn some parts back into water. When I say so, use your cables to tie him up. The ground started shaking. The ice started cracking. He's breaking free, Korra. Quick, do it now. As Korra motioned with her hands, small holes formed in the ice, leading a straight path right to the center. But time was running short. Large chunks of the ice started breaking free. Now, the metal benders launched their cables through the tiny holes and controlled them to wrap around Trunks' body. Once all 16 cables wrapped around him several times, they pulled tight. Korra raised her hands and unfroze the ice. He fell down to the floor, completely wrapped in metal, gasping for air. They all cautiously moved in on him, knowing that he was completely immobilized, but not willing to take any chances. Trunks looked up at them as they drew closer. He grit his teeth, trying to hold back the anger. His body left the ground and his veins started bulging. Everyone get back! Korra yelled. As he gave a sharp yell, a shock wave shot out from around him. The cables quickly disintegrated and so did everything within a 15-foot radius. All of the officers were thrown back by the force of his energy. He was pissed. The officers had seen enough to know that they were not safe there, and quickly hurried away. While all of them retreated, Korra ran forward and bent as much of the ground at him as she could. The giant rocks just couldn't make contact with him. It broke apart when it got close, being ground up by an invisible force. He dropped to the ground after calming down a bit. The glow in Korra's eyes came forth as she entered the avatar state. A large air current formed around her, lifting her into the air. She pulled more earth from the ground, throwing it at incredible speeds. He jumped out of the way as quickly as he could. One of them just nearly missed his head. He tucked behind a satamobile for slight cover. The rocks split through metal of the vehicle like a hot knife through butter. Without a second thought, he picked up a piece of the metal from the car and threw it at her, trying to distract her. What followed was something no one could foresee. The elongated piece of metal smashed through the rock and pierced her on the right side of the middle of her body. The front of the metal went all the way through her and got stuck about halfway. The glow in her eyes faded and she dropped to the pavement below. Korra! They yelled. Lin was the first one to get to her. Tenzin was right behind her as well. She lay on the cold pavement on her left side. Blood quickly escaped from the stab wound. She looked so vulnerable. Tenzin picked her up from the floor, careful not to touch the metal. Korra! Stay with us! Trunks came running to them. Stay back! Lin yelled. He stopped a few feet from them. I'm so sorry. I thought she'd stop it with her bending. She's not a metal bender. Tenzin stepped between them. Stop it, Lin, we have to rush her to the emergency room. She doesn't have long. My cables and communication equipment are busted. I can't call my airship captain. Trunks stepped forward. I can take her. Absolutely not, she said. I can fly her there in under a minute. She'll die if I don't. No way. Tenzin, hand her over to me and try to get the captain's attention. You're wasting time. Tenzin looked at Trunks then back at the blood-stained girl in his arms. I'm so sorry. His eyes shot up at Trunks. To Trunks it was clear that the older man was fighting a losing battle and holding his emotions of anger and anguish at bay. Tenzin's eyes shook and a vein in his forehead was almost past the point of exploding. Trunks was expecting the worst to come forth. Then as a shock to everyone, including himself, Tenzin outstretched his arms. Get her there alive. Please. He said, his eyes refusing to meet Trunks's. Without a word, he took her out of Tenzin's arms, pressed her tightly against his chest and lifted off the ground. Before Lin could even utter a word, he was gone. He burst through the hospital door, still being careful not to cause any more harm to the Avatar. The hospital was filled to the brim. People all around were being treated for some serious injuries. There were healers and patients everywhere. He rushed up to the reception. The woman sitting at the desk was elbow deep in paperwork, not even looking up when Trunks reached her. Help! She needs a doctor. She looked up at Trunks. Oh my gosh! Is that the Avatar? Yes. She's been speared. She needs help now. She fumbled around for an intercom. She managed to find it and call out to any remaining healers. Trunks looked on as several people walked by. They all had severe burns covering their bodies. One could barely walk. What the hell happened here? He asked. A bomb went off somewhere near the harbor. We've had hundreds rushed through here. We were totally unprepared for this volume of people. We're very understaffed. A woman ran through the door, only to stop a few feet from them. She froze, almost as if what she saw couldn't have been real. How could that have happened to their avatar? She quickly snapped out of it, knowing that she won't have much time left. Follow me, she said as she started moving back through the door she came from. Trunks wasted no time in following, jogging through the halls, still holding the avatar tightly in his arms. Trunks stopped for a second. What was that? He could have sworn she moved. He looked down at her. Her mouth was slightly open, allowing a light flow of her warm breath to hit his neck. Her eyes were clenched. He held his breath, paying close attention to her facial expression. Her brows furrowed and she let out a groan as she went in and out of consciousness. Her hands pulled at his collar and she buried her head in the crook of his neck, almost as if instinctively seeking shelter from the horrendous pain in her abdomen. Just hang in there, Avatar, he said softly. Just as he uttered those words, her eyelids flinched and slowly opened. Through half-drawn lids, her gaze fell onto him. He couldn't pinpoint the emotions he saw in her swirling blue depths. Her eyes spoke 1,000 words, but yet at the same time said nothing. It must have been only a second before her eyes shut once more, but for Trunks it was enough to shake him to his core. Hurry up! She doesn't have much time left. The healer's yell brought his attention back to the task at hand. He shook his head and continued following her. She opened a sliding wooden door to her right, and entered. He followed. The room was darker than he expected. Just as part of what he'd come to learn from waterbender culture, the walls were painted in various shades of blue. Some parts of the walls were decorated with animal coats. The floor also had a big animal fur rug. But the most interesting part of the room was a small shallow pool dead in the center. In it was a slightly elevated surface as to where the patients would lay ankle deep in the water. "Lay her down on her side here on the table," she said, motioning to a table beside the pool. He lowered the avatar onto the surface and gently placed her on her left side. He took a few steps back as the healer moved closer to the table. In her hand she held a pair of scissors. She took hold of the lower part of Korra's bloody shirt and cut it to where the metal was sticking out. She did the same with the back side. Trunks took another step back and turned for the door. "No. You're staying." He blinked. "What for?" She looked at Trunks for a moment, then bent over the avatar, further examining the spear. "I need help removing this." "Shouldn't I just call one of the other healers?" "I said stay," she said with fire in her eyes. "Everyone's got their hands full. Some of the patients are in worse condition than she is." He swallowed, but then nodded. She motioned to stand at the opposite side of the table. "So I'm going to have to put pressure on her from both sides. The healing water will help the blood to clot as you're going to be making new cuts when you pull it." Are you sure?" "Yes. But you have to be careful. Try to pull it out with a steady hand." She bent water from the pool and let it form around her hands. A light glow started emanating from within the water, slowly becoming brighter and brighter. Soon the glow lit up the entire room. "Are you ready?" He took a deep breath and placed one hand on the part sticking out her front. Korra groaned as soon as he made contact. With weak eyes she looked at them. Her voice was barely audible, but she still protested, "No, no. Don't let him. Avatar Korra, we're going to have to pull the metal back out. I'm sorry, but this will be very painful." She tried to protest once more, but her eyes fell closed. The healer brought her hands to both sides of where the metal penetrated Korra's body. The glowing water seeped into the holes, and flowed through her wound. She nodded at Trunks. He put his left hand on Korra's abdomen, providing a stable counterforce. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Slowly he started pulling on the jagged object. Korra's faint whisper from earlier completely vanished as she let out a blood-curdling scream. She tried to push Trunks away, but his grip held strong. Inch by inch the metal piece started revealing more of itself. "Please stop. Stop. It hurts." Korra's wails never failed to subside. Trunks used his left hand to hold her down. He stopped pulling and looked over at the other side to see their progress. "It's almost out, Avatar," the healer reassured her. Korra tried to put on the bravest face she could muster. Her jaw clenched and she took a few deep breaths. With tears in her eyes she nodded at Trunks. He gave a nod in return and pulled a bit harder this time. Her breaths were very short and sharp, and a couple of grunts could be heard. Other than that she made no noise at all. She stared straight ahead into the open room, her teeth gritting through the pain. Trunks had to admit, he was very astonished at how tough this girl really was. The metal became thinner and thinner as more came out. Korra shut her eyes tight and yelped. The last part was especially painful. But she pushed through it. Trunks gave a final yank and pulled the object free. Blood seeped from the wound on both sides of her. Her eyebrows relaxed a bit as the pain subsided, be it only a little. She let out a slight whisper before slipping out of consciousness. "Quick! We have to get her into the pool." "Right." He looked at the metal shard, blood still dripping from it. Tossing it aside, he slid his arms underneath the avatar's body. Gently he lifted her off the table and placed her onto the platform in the water. Immediately the entire pool lit up in a soft blue glow. He looked down at her helpless form. He's just put her through the most painful experience of her life. Overwhelmed by guilt, he dropped to the floor beside her, just contemplating what had just happened. He sat in silence while watching the glow of the water wash over her. Without reason, he reached out to her, lightly grazing her cheek with the back of his hand. He sighed as he dropped it back into his lap. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He stood up and headed for the door. "Wait," the healer said, her voice soft. "You saved her life." Those words didn't console him much. Without saying a word, he left. Earlier that day. 7 guys in the building. We enter through the side. We get the cash, plant the bombs and get out. No room for any fuck-ups. Got it? A heavy sigh filled the back of the black van. Yeah. We got it. One of the masked men growled. I'm not talking to you. The leader, Koba, snarled back. I'm talking to the idiot mime back there. The crew looked over at the guy sitting alone at the back, fiddling with his shoelaces. There were plenty of open seats, but he always preferred the floor. He looked up when he noticed them staring. His eyes jolted around before landing on Koba. He held his glare for a few seconds, shrugged and returned to his shoes. The people I have to work with. Koba grunted, picking up a bag between his legs and tossing it to the mute. He heaved a sigh. You can be lucky that you're good at what you do or I'd have gotten rid of you long ago. Eyes glued to the floor, the mute stretched out and took the duffel bag filled to the brim with explosives. He dug through its contents, only to give the leader a questioning look. What? Koba growled. Oh, do you want this? He pulled the detonator from his left pocket. The mute nodded his head. Well, if you want it then just speak up. His eyes narrowed and a small crease formed below his brow. He glared at the leader once more before resuming fiddling with his laces. The crew couldn't help but chuckle. That's what I thought, Koba said, putting the device back in his pocket. The van moved through the industrial roads of Republic City until it reached the harbor. They pulled into an alleyway along a busy street. The vehicle came to a halt right next to an old, brick warehouse. You all know what to do, Koba said. They opened the back door of the van and silently moved through the side entrance of the building. There was no one in the first small room they entered. Koba peeked around a corner and spotted one man, preoccupied with preparing some tea in their makeshift kitchen. His back was turned to them. Koba made a small hand gesture, and one of the members of his crew crept up behind the man, quickly wrapping his arm around the man's neck and mouth. A short struggle ensued, but to no avail. His neck cracked into an impossible position and he went limp, dropping to the floor. They all moved ahead. Remaining unseen would become a much more difficult task, as the rest of the warehouse mostly consisted of wide open spaces. The remaining 6 men on guard sat around a table, half focused on the radio and half focused on their poker game. The 5-man crew moved through the shelves, trying to get closer without being noticed. Fortunately for them, the warehouse wasn't very well lit. Koba motioned for his crew to stand back as he continued alone. He stopped and stood up. He took a deep breath, stretched out 2 fingers on each hand and moved them rhythmically through the air. Small amounts of lightning danced through the air around him, following his every movement. The sparks crackled as they became thicker. The men at the table immediately turned to look at what was going on. But it was too late. Koba had already unleashed his will upon them with terrible ferocity. It made full contact with 2 of the men. The rest scattered as the lightning came down around them. The rest of the crew hurried out to join the conflict. The first guard to get to his feet threw a quick onslaught of fire blasts at the masked men. Some of them made contact, but the crew didn't waste any time encountering the attacks. The other 3 guards joined in to fight off the masked intruders. A small war ensued between the benders. One of the guards singled out the mute, bending a flurry of stone in his direction. The mute dodged some of them with ease, but was caught by a fireball by another guard. He regained his balance after a brief stumble, but a large slab of rock crashed into his chest. The force completely knocked him off his feet, sending him tumbling right into Koba. Both were knocked to the ground. Koba pushed the mute off of him and gave him a hard punch to the gut. Idiot! He yelled as he got to his feet and struck both the guards down with another lightning bolt. The other masked men made quick work of the remaining 2 guards. They collected themselves as the conflict came to a resolution and the last dust settled. All that were left now was getting what they came for. A member of the crew walked up to one of the crates to look at its contents. His eyes grew wide as he counted them. Holy shit! There's more than 20 bags of opium in this shipment alone. That's an easy 2 million yuans. Shut up and get to the safe, Koba snarled. That's chump change compared to what's in there. He looked over at the mute sitting on the floor. Kano, help the mime set the charges. The drill takes a few minutes. If you finish before we're done with the safe, load the drugs into the car. You got it, boss. The mute got to his feet as the other three left to crack the safe. He and Kano wasted no time. They opened the duffel bag and started placing the charges on every load-bearing wall they could find. They swept through every room, making sure that nothing will be left standing after they're done. The other three reached the safe and took out the drill they had constructed. This is some pretty heavy-duty stuff, huh? The mob really doesn't fuck around. One of them stated, marveling at just how big the safe store was. It's the largest one they've ever tried to crack. You think the drill will get through this? We'll just have to wait and see, said the man as he put his headphones on. The other two followed his lead. He fired up the drill and inched it closer to the safe. A near-piercing screech erupted as the drill made contact. The mute and Kano planted the last charges they needed on the first floor. Kano looked into the bag. There's 5 charges left. Wanna plant them upstairs? The mute simply nodded his head and followed Kano up the stairs. His heart was beating a bit faster than he was used to and he could feel his hands sweating. He took a deep breath. As they reached the top of the stairs, the mute slipped and landed with a heavy thud. Kano turned around to see him lying on the stairs, holding his leg and quivering in pain. What the hell are you doing? The mute just looked at him, the skin between his brows contorting as he clenched his eyes. Kano sighed, feeling bad for him. Ah shit. He went a few steps down to where the mute was laying. He stooped down and reached out to the leg the mute was clutching. Let me have a look. In one explosive motion, the mute grasped his arm, wrapped his legs around it and forcefully pulled it downwards till it snapped. The man barely had time to yell as the excruciating pain overcame him before he was kicked down the stairs. He tumbled for what felt like an eternity before slamming the back of his head on the concrete floor. In just a split second he ceased all movement. There was no getting up. The mute took a few seconds to catch his breath. He got to his feet and walked down the stairs. He took long strides at the bottom, making sure not to step on Kano. The sound of the drill in the other room filled his ears once more as he hurried through the warehouse. He went out the back door and stepped out onto the docks. Waiting on a small boat was a man and a woman in normal fishing attire, with exception to a piece of cloth that covered their mouths and noses. The mute motioned for them to come inside. The two followed him, one of them holding a big duffel bag of his own. They moved through the warehouse, careful not to be seen by the other three working with their drill. They entered a room behind the one holding the large safe. The mute pointed to a wall and the woman carefully used her earthbending to tear it down. It revealed the large metal structure behind the rubble, the back of the safe. He reached into the bag and extracted a cable as thick as a person's thumb, connected to a series of devices. They placed the devices on the metal wall, the cable spin resembling a small door shape. They took a step back and activated the device. The cable heated up rapidly, turning a bright orange. The metal underneath it started deforming under the intense heat. Sparks scattered all over as the device made its way through the thick metal. In just a few seconds, it melted all the way through. The hole it made might have been small, but it was big enough to get what they needed. They moved the metal piece out the way and stepped inside. Being inside the safe certainly wasn't pleasant. The sound of the drill making its way through the thick metal door completely filled the compartment as it bounced off the walls. But it was all worth the pain, snuffed out by the sight that awaited. Stacks of money and large boxes of gold. Jackpot. There was no time to waste. They filled the now empty bag to the brim with as many stacks of paper yuans as they could. The man grabbed 2 large boxes of gold and they left for the boat. The mute stayed behind, sifting through the safe, throwing all the money off the shelves. The screeching became impossibly loud as the drill made its final grooves in the metal. Where was it? He searched frantically, decimating every shelf he could find, looking for his true prize. His eyes widened as the drill broke through the last bit of metal. Where was it? Time was running short. He could feel the sweat collecting around his eyes, his hands fumbling through everything in sight. But he wasn't about to give up. Clank. Time was up. And there it was, hidden on the lowest shelf between purple stacks of yuans. Boys, Prepare to feast your eyes on the most money you will ever see in your life, Koba said as the door swung open. The grins on their faces were very short-lived, however. Their prizes were already raided. When Koba saw the hole in the back wall, his stomach dropped. Slowly it dawned on him. Son of a bitch! He yelled as he ran out of the safe. His heart started racing as he saw one of his crew members lying at the bottom of the staircase, blood pooling all around his head. The faint noise of an engine rumbled outside by the water. He ran up to the window to see the mute standing on a boat, moving away from the warehouse. The mute was staring directly at him, his gaze almost piercing right through his skull. Koba was speechless, motionless. How could this have happened? How could he have been so foolish? The mute reached into his pocket and pulled out a device. Koba squinted, trying to see what it was through the dirty glass of the window. No. It can't! He yelled. His hands ran through his pockets as he frantically searched for the detonator. Nothing. The mute gave the leader a small, knowing nod. He held his hand up and squeezed the trigger. The warehouse erupted into a spectacular display of fire and destruction. A massive shock wave filled the area, ripping through the surrounding water. The warehouse came crashing down. He didn't continue watching the flames. As the boat sped away, he chose to sit down and admire his prize. It was a small locked box, decorated with a dragon insignia. It was barely bigger than his hand. The corners of his eyes contracted as a giant smile formed underneath his mask. This was worth far more than any piece of gold. Trunks sat on top of a skyscraper in the brisk cold of night. The city itself held much warmth and beauty, but all he could behold was the dark reality of what he'd done. He was solely responsible for almost murdering the most iconic figure in that world's entire history. A teenage girl was lying in an unforgiving hospital bed, fighting yet another battle for her life, all because of him. It wasn't her fault or the police's. Only his. Why didn't he just fly away? Why did he have to stay and fight? Frustration? Anger? These questions kept racing through his mind, yet remained unanswered. He took deep breaths, closing his eyes, trying not to imagine the pain she must be in. But it was impossible not to. He's had his fair share as well, dying at the hands of a monster. He looked down at his hands, still stained with her blood dark red. Was he a monster too? Another deep breath. From where he was sitting he could see the window of her healing room. The curtains had been closed for quite some time, but he could still sense her energy. How could he fix the mess he's made? It just seemed impossible. A gasp filled the silence of the dark room, her breathing becoming shallow and rough. Slowly her unconsciousness slipped away from her and she could feel her presence reforming on the bed. What's that awful taste? She slowly opened her eyes, taking in her surroundings. There wasn't much to see as everything was shrouded in darkness. Small amounts of light leaked in through the dark curtain as the city lights tried its best to join the Avatar's room. She noticed the pool in the middle. A healing room? Thoughts cascaded through her mind, none of them standing still for her to focus on. Why was she in a hospital? What happened? Where was everyone? She pulled her arms to her sides, attempting to sit up straight. But when her abdominal muscles hardened, a crushing pain seared through her body. It felt excruciating. She quickly ceased all movement and flopped back on her bed, her breathing rugged once more. The foul taste in her mouth must have been a mixture of her own blood and who knows what else. Then it hit her. The devil of Republic City. He did this to her. She recalled the fight that had taken place between the two of them, his speed, his strength, his raw power. What is he? She asked under her breath. The faint traces of her voice sounded groggy and unknown to her. It's like she hadn't said a word in years. She gathered her strength and stilled her nerves, trying to sit up once more. It felt even more impossibly painful than her first attempt. She pushed through it, groaning as her muscles refused to cooperate. But she continued till she was finally upright and swung her legs off the bed. She took a large breath. Curse her stubbornness. Korra heaved forward, putting her weight on shaky legs. Unsurprisingly, as soon as she left the bed, she collapsed. She yelped as the sharp pain stabbed her abdomen. Her body instinctively curled over and she clenched her teeth. Her hand moved down to her stomach and felt a wetness covering her body. She heard the door slide open and footsteps rush around. A harsh light suddenly filled the room, much too bright for her eyes. She squinted, trying to adjust to its intensity. The footsteps neared her. "Oh my gosh! Avatar, are you all right?" a woman's voice asked. Korra didn't bother with an answer. The overwhelming pain kept hold of her. She felt the woman's arms curl around her and slowly lift her up. Korra tried her best to support her own weight, but it was of no use. The smaller woman somehow managed to get Korra back on her bed. She inspected Korra's wounds. They were torn open, causing some blood to escape. She removed Korra's bandages and bent a small amount of water from the pool. The water lit up into a light blue as it seeped over her wounds. The furrow in Korra's brow relaxed a bit as some of the pain subsided. Her breathing calmed down and became more stable. As her mind cleared, she could finally focus on one thing again. She looked over at the healer. "What happened?" Her voice was faint, but it at least sounded more like her own this time. The healer looked up at Korra. "You were involved in a battle where you were badly injured." "Yeah, I remember that part. But how did I end up here?" "A young man brought you in. He carried you all the way into this room." At those words she froze. Could it really have been him? She had a few recollections of him carrying her through the hallway and pulling the spear out of her. But it couldn't have been real, could it? Why would he help her when he's the one responsible in the first place? Did he have purple hair?" "Yes, he did. It seemed odd to me at first. Is he a friend of yours?" Korra's brows furrowed once more as she stared straight ahead. "Definitely not." The healer finished working on Korra and applied some bandages to conceal the wound. She was on her way out before stopping at the door for one last thing. "I should mention that Councilman Tenzin was here, along with some other people. They wanted to wait till you woke up, but I sent them home after a few hours," she said. "Now you better not tear those wounds again, you hear?" She gave a quick smile, left the room and closed the door behind her. Silence took over the room yet again. There was just one image that kept on replaying in her head. It was that one moment. That moment when she first opened her eyes as he carried her in his arms. She remembered clutching at his collar and burrowing herself in the crook of his neck. But when she looked up and saw him, she didn't feel threatened. No, not in that moment. It was his eyes. When their eyes met, it was almost like she could see who he was. They seemed to hold so much grief. She felt it. It was almost as if, in that fleeting moment, she knew him. Korra quickly caught herself, knowing just how crazy her thoughts were. Something like that wouldn't be possible. She could just chalk it up as a temporary lapse in sanity caused by her severe injury. Nothing more. Before her mind could wander further, a knock filled the silence. "Come in," she said, wondering if it might be Tenzin, or maybe even Mako. It would be nice to see Mako again." She heard the knock once more. "I said come in," she yelled. "I can't," a voice yelled back. Korra couldn't believe her ears. She could have sworn the voice came from the window. Her heart started racing. A million thoughts flew through her mind. No. It couldn't possibly be him. She closed her eyes, hoping that it was all a bad dream, wishing she could just wake up back at Air Temple Island. But she couldn't put it off. She had to see. Against the wishes of her healer, she sat up in her bed once more and placed her feet on the floor. As expected, a searing pain ripped through her. She grit her teeth and pushed through it, heaving her body forwards, slowly. Unlike last time, her legs didn't buckle under her weight. A small moment of relief hit her, and she exhaled. She felt unsteady, sure, but simply being able to stand upright gave her a much-needed confidence boost. She took a small step, quickly placing her left hand against the wall when she got close enough. Another step, then another. The wall proved a big help in steadying herself as she slowly walked toward the curtains, with her right hand holding her screaming abdomen. But any pain that came forth was simply pushed to the back of her mind as she powered through. Almost there. She stopped and took a deep breath. Does she really want to see who is on the other side? She stilled her nerves and slowly pulled away at the curtain. And there he was. Her heart dropped when she laid eyes on him. It really was him. All of her instincts were screaming at her, close the curtains. Run. Throw a fireball at him. Just do something. But she couldn't. She just stared blankly. There he was, floating in midair, looking at her. Her eyes made contact with his, and just like in that hallway, they were filled with grief. Every fiber of her being was pleading her not to do it. But it was like her hand had a mind of its own. She reached out and unlocked the window, slowly sliding it open. The cold breeze entered through the new opening, making her shiver slightly. The whistling of the wind was all sound between them. Neither of them dared to say anything, perhaps they just didn't know what to. Trunks opened his mouth, but only uttered a single noise before closing it again and shaking his head. He looked more nervous than she was. He tried again. May I come in? Korra didn't answer. She just stared at him, baffled by his nerve to show his face after doing what he did. But yet again, there was something about him. Something that she couldn't explain. After a few moments, she nodded her head and moved out the way to let him through. Once he was inside, she shut the window. For the life of her, she couldn't understand why she wasn't shouting at him. She had so much to be angry about, and she was. But in that moment, all that she could muster was a faint indifference. So you're the devil, huh? He too was a little taken aback by her unwarlike demeanor. But he understood that it might still come. He nodded his head. She didn't really know what she should say, but she knew that there was a questioning that's been burning her mind since she woke up. She looked down at her stomach, lightly running her hand over the bandages. His eyes followed her movements. Why? She whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear. He knew exactly what she meant. It's the same question he's been asking himself all day. A question that he himself hasn't yet been able to answer. He could hardly look her in the eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. Korra could feel her calm demeanor slip away at those words, her anger once again taking its usual place. She couldn't help but release a sharp bark of a laugh. It rasped through her throat, sounding strange even to her own ears. Gee, you didn't mean it. Thank you. I feel so much better now, she said, making sure to emphasize her sarcastic tone. Her frustration was very clear to him. He understood that she would be upset, and rightfully so. I know you're mad. Mad? She interrupted, storming over to him, not caring about the pain it caused in her stomach. Mad doesn't even begin to cut it, pal. She didn't stop until they were face to face. You have no idea how furious I am right now. If I wasn't this injured, you'd be the one lying in that bed right now, begging for a healer, she defiantly said. As empty as she knew her threat was, Korra kept her ground, staring right through him. He remained quiet. You have the nerve to come here after almost killing me, and now what, you won't even say anything? She kept looking at him. Still he remained silent, his eyes dropping down to his feet. Her anger subsided a little, and her senses reminded her of the overwhelming pain in her abdomen. She looked down at her bandages once more. A bit of red has already formed on the top layer. She snickered and turned away from him, slowly making her way back to the bed. If you're not gonna talk, then get the hell out. She sat down, facing the wall. The room was silent, the tension palpable. At that moment, Korra didn't even care that he hadn't left yet. Her thoughts were messy, rushing around without a purpose. Trunks walked over to the same wall that she was blankly staring at. A sigh escaped his throat as he slumped down against it, only slightly to the right of where she was looking. Staring straight ahead at the foot of the bed, he finally broke the silence. I'm sorry. This isn't what I wanted. She glared at him. And what did you want? She asked. I wanted to help people, he said with another sigh. When I came here, it was because I had nothing left. I've lost a lot in my life. Family. Friends. No matter how hard I tried, I was never strong enough to save them. When I saw that people here were going through the same thing, I couldn't stand idly by and watch them suffer. Helping people is one thing, but what you do is something completely different, she said defiantly. What I do isn't pretty, but I do what it takes to get the job done. And it seems like I'm the only one fighting for these people. That's not true. I'm the Avatar and I have done what exactly? I see it every day. Mobs, drugs, murders, there's so much of it in Republic City and it doesn't seem like you or the police are doing anything about it. She wanted to say something, but couldn't. For some reason, she felt guilty. Since Amon, she's been so focused on training that she's hardly had time to try and help people. Yes, she went on patrol sometimes, but that only happened because of him. She released her breath with a shudder. For a moment, neither of them had anything to say. They just sat there, staring at the open space in front of them. Korra took a small breath. I try, you know. Her voice was in complete contrast with the tone she'd taken before. It was soft and full of uncertainty. He looked over at her, but she didn't meet his gaze. She continued. Ever since Amon happened, I've been doubting myself. Yes, I defeated him, but honestly, it was by accident. When I had all my strength, I was helpless against him. Ever since Amon, I've been terrified at the idea of someone coming along that's even more powerful than him. She paused and looked at him. And then you did. Korra sniffed. Her voice was quivering a little, but she kept on talking. I had to put on a brave face in front of everyone. And when they told me that they had found you, I jumped at the opportunity to show to myself that I have nothing to be afraid of. But now this happened, and I don't know how I'm gonna deal with this. She tried her best to keep from tearing up in front of him, but it wasn't hard for him to see that she was struggling to keep her emotions at bay. At that moment it became clearer than ever to him. For all the stories of the Avatar's might and power, she was still just a teenage girl. A teenage girl that was in a lot of pain because of him. I'm sorry. I know exactly what that feels like. Feeling so helpless when the whole world is depending on you. It really weighs down on you, huh? She sniffed again. Yeah. For a good few minutes, neither of them made a sound. Eventually Trunks got up to his feet and walked over to the window. I should probably get moving. Where are you going? She asked. There's some stuff I have to sort out. Someone has been killing a lot of people lately. I have to find out who they are. He opened the window, allowing a rush of cool air to enter. Wait. She said. You never told me your name. Trunks. He said with a smile. I'm sorry about what happened. It was nice finally meeting you, Avatar Korra. And with that he left, closing the window behind him. Silence filled the room again, and she strangely felt a bit alone. She didn't really know what to make of the situation. But, in a weird way, she felt better. A small smile formed on her face. Surprisingly, it kinda was, Trunks. That's it, please comment for a part 2.